Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Executive's Guide to Fast Value Creation, an 80/20 webinar for operating partners and PE-backed executives. This webinar is presented to you in partnership with Strategex. Strategex is the premier 80/20 consulting firm, but many of our members on the line probably know Strategex for their customer due diligence offering. But Strategex offers so much more, including 80/20 value creation strategies. They're so effective, Strategex has generated over $3 billion, that's right, $billion in operating income improvement for their clients in 10 years. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar to ask questions. These questions will be monitored and the presenters will answer as many as possible after today's presentation. This webinar will be recorded, and we thank you so much again for joining us. Our speakers are Anthony Barr and Bob Flynn. Anthony Barr is the Managing Director of Strategex's Private Equity Solutions. He has worked with 100+ private equity firms to mitigate risk with customer due diligence and jumpstart value creation with 80/20. His second baby is expected on September 19th. Bob Flynn is an operating advisor at Strategex. Prior to Strategex, Bob held various executive leadership positions, including CEO, divisional president, COO, and CFO. He has completed 30+ buy-side acquisition transactions and has sold 3 companies successfully to 2 private equity firms and 1 strategic buyer. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Anthony.
Great. Thank you, Nia, for the introductions, and thanks to ACG for hosting this event today. Also, thanks to you, Bob, for joining us as well. Are you up in Michigan today?
I am. Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Hi, everybody. Yeah, it's great to be presenting with you today, Anthony, and I look forward to a really fantastic session.
Yeah, and thanks of all most to everyone who still signs up for webinars after the past 3 years and sitting through dozens of these things. We appreciate you spending some time with us today and learning more about 80/20. But here's the truth. Bob and I would probably still go through this presentation if one person joined versus the hundreds that we have dialed in live today. We may very well even go through this presentation if nobody joined at all. And here's why. Number one, we love talking about 80/20, right? It's just something that's in our blood. We're so passionate about it. We love to share it with people. Number two, we know how powerful 80/20 can be. As Nia mentioned, it's generated over $3 billion in operating income for our clients. And number three, and probably the most important, at least for me, is we know how transformative it can be, both in our personal lives and our professional lives. And by the end of this talk, we want you to feel the same way. We want you to feel like you have just caught lightning in a bottle and have a whole new framework for achieving profitable market share growth. Now, we love 80/20 because, just simply speaking for myself, I'm a lazy person, all right? I want to earn more, but work less. And 80/20 allows me to do that. One CEO told us that the best part about 80/20 wasn't the financial impact it had on their business, but rather that 80/20 allowed them to not miss a single soccer game, right? Make more, work less, more fun. What's not to love about that? We know how powerful 80/20 can be because of the financial improvement it delivers. As we mentioned, $3 billion in op income improvement with the clients we've worked with. And we know 80/20 is transformational because that is the one word that comes up over and over and over again when our clients talk about the impact that 80/20 has had on their businesses. It's transformational. And I think the reason for this is because 80/20 it's far more than just a profit enhancement or growth strategy tool. When done well, it completely changes a company's culture from one that is distracted by all of the things it can do to the one that is just laser focused on the few things that it should do. 80/20 doesn't ask us to do more with less, right? We hear that a lot, do more, but do it with less. 80/20 asks us to do less with less, but still emerge far more profitable. It's about focusing on the things that matter. And that's exactly what IDEX did. 80/20 helped IDEX increase their sales by 67%, operating income by 670 basis points, just by applying a radical focus on the things that actually created value for the firm. And as a result, shareholder return grew 450%. Another example is the textbook example, Illinois Toolworks, which is where 80/20 as a business model was first implemented. 80/20 transformed ITW from an $882 million market cap company to one with a $57 billion market cap. It's a 65x increase.
Wow.
Yeah. And it gets more interesting because over the same time period, Dover, which is, a pretty comparable company that tried a lot of different profit enhancement, a lot of different growth strategies, but they did not try 80/20, saw a 12x increase in their market cap.
Anthony, it's interesting. I think it's not just their largest competitor, Dover, but actually I think they outperformed their peer group over a long-term period of time. So 80/20 has really driven them to outperform everybody.
That's right. And we also know just firsthand how transformative 80/20 was for ITW beyond the financials. At Strategex, we're just incredibly fortunate to have a dozen or so former ITW execs who helped make this growth happen. And one of these former ITW employees that now works with us, likes to say that the reason he's good at 80/20 is because his quote, "I'm stupid enough to understand it," end quote. And I promise those are his words, those are not mine. But the simplicity of it is another reason we love 80/20. It's not necessarily intuitive. It's not always the easiest to execute, but the foundation of the framework is pretty simple. And here it is in 3 pictures. Number 1, 20% of your customers generate 80% of your revenue. Classic 80/20, classic Pareto. Where it gets really, really strategic is when we start thinking about how we apply our overhead. Now, typical accounting rules say that 80% of our costs would be applied to those few customers that generate 80% of revenue. But here's the twist. All right, in our head, in our heart, in our gut, we know this is just not reality. When customer number 1 calls, we tend to spend just as much time and effort to service them as when customer number 1,000 calls. We tend to treat all customers the same, which means there's no way typical accounting rules reflect how we actually spend our overhead. And that's what ITW figured out, and what we validate time and time again with our own clients, is that in reality, our overhead is tied to the number of customers we have, not the revenue they produce. Why? Because again, we treat them all the same. So if there's one thing to take away from today, it's this: learn to treat your customers differently. Now, admittedly, this is not the most egalitarian way to run a business, all right? But it is the most profitable way to run a business. The best have to be treated differently than the rest for 2 reasons. Number 1 is, as we just saw, when we treat everyone the same, it's going to severely compress our margins, and we're going to need a lot more overhead to service those customers, all for very little in return. Right? Margin compression plus distraction is not a good value creation approach. Number 2 is, if you think about it, we're actually doing our largest customers, right? Those critical few, those whales, a huge disservice if we're not treating them drastically better than the insignificant many. Now, we're really good at doing this in our personal lives. So for example, when it's Bob's birthday, I might send him a text if I even remember. But when it's my partner Janelle's birthday, I get her a card, we go out to dinner, she gets a gift. Now, she's the 80, she gets treated better than Bob, who, Bob, you're great, but to me, you're still a 20, all right?
As a matter of fact, Anthony, my birthday was August 22nd, and I did not receive a text from you.
I forgot, I'm sorry. And we're really good at this in our personal lives. I think the problem is we get to work and we sometimes forget this, right? We sometimes forget that it's okay to treat people differently because we're so hardwired to just want to deliver that excellent experience to everyone all the time. But there are some businesses that are actually pretty good at this. Now, think about airlines or rental car companies or hotel chains, right? They all treat their frequent flyers, their frequent drivers, their frequent guests drastically different based on their value. Now, everyone is treated fairly, right? We're not saying treat anyone poorly, but the ones who deserve it have a much better experience along the way. I want to talk a little bit more about theory before we hand it over to Bob and get some real world examples. And there's 2 things I want to make crystal clear. The first is that 80/20 is absolutely a data-driven process. Sometimes we hear that 80/20 is just about taking an axe to the customer base, eliminating, thousands of SKUs. When we talk about using 80/20 to simplify businesses, we take a very methodical approach. Just like in medicine, rule number 1 for us is to do no harm, right? We don't want to go in with an axe. We want to go in with a scalpel. Number 2, and again, we hear this a lot as well, is 80/20 is not just a quick hit margin improvement tool, right? If you're just using 80/20, to help remove complexity from your business, you're kind of missing the point and you're missing the upside. Because 80-20, when done well, yes, don't get me wrong, it's a powerful simplification tool, but it's an even more powerful growth tool. So to help demonstrate these 2 points, I want to show you some of the tools that we use. The first is a quartile analysis. Now, the very first thing we do when we start working with a client is we get their revenue by customer, we sort it top down, and we put those customers into 4 even quartiles based on the number of customers we have. So in this example here, we're looking at a business with 100 customers, 25 customers in each. What we see time and time again is that quartile 1 generates 89% of our revenue, quartile 2 is 7%, and then quartile 3 and 4 combined, right? 50% of our customers usually get us about 4% or less of our revenue. This is something that is just like one of those weird laws of nature. We do this hundreds of times a year, and these numbers really don't deviate a whole lot more than plus or minus maybe 5 points. It's amazingly consistent. And then we do the same thing on the product side. So let's say we're looking at a business with 2,000 SKUs. We would do the same thing, rank it top down by revenue, put them into quartiles, look at what percent of revenue comes from each quartile, and consistently, directionally, the numbers there are 89, 7, 3, 1 as well. Now, when I say we're very methodical when we talk about simplifying a business and how we're not just taking an axe to, these 50 smallest customers and these 1,000 smallest SKUs, is because we have to understand that there's still some strategic value in those small customers. If those small customers are buying SKU number 1 that we know is really profitable, really strategic, there's still a case to do that, right? We don't necessarily want to eliminate that. And conversely, let's say we have SKU number 2,000, which we sell $50 of a year, but is being purchased by customer number 1. We want to keep doing that, right? Because we know it's important for the relationship and the stickiness of that key revenue generator. So we look at the interplay between customers and products before we start thinking about it, simplification. Now, this is, theoretical. Let's look at some real numbers. So here's a quartile analysis for a private equity-backed distributor of seals and gaskets. At the time of the analysis, we were conducting due diligence, and the company had 2,100 customers, give or take. The top quartile of the customer base generated 95% of their sales. Right, so those top 528 customers in quartile 1 was pretty much all of their revenue. Conversely, the entire bottom half of the customer base, 1,056 accounts, all of those relationships being managed, all of that complexity being managed in exchange for 1.1% of sales. And that's combined quartiles 3 and 4. We see a similar story when we ran the same analysis on their products. At the time that we did this, they had a little over 18,000 SKUs. The top quartile, their top 4,600 products, got the 92% of their revenue. The entire bottom half of the product lineup, right, over 9,000 SKUs, all in exchange for 1.8% of their sales combined. And this is not unusual. A lot of people see this for the first time with their own businesses numbers, and we highly recommend you run these numbers on your own after the call. A lot of people are shocked when they see this. They didn't understand how much complexity there actually is in their business. But for Bob and myself, we see this over and over. There's nothing unique about this. Concentration in a B2B context is just a way of doing business. It's all about how we manage it and seize the upside. So some questions that Bob and I ask when we see something like this. Number 1, how much time is being spent to serve customers in quartile 3 and 4? Right. And if you think about it, a customer in quartile 3 and 4 is doing less than $1,000 a year with us. Right. How much time are we spent servicing them? Is it really worth it? On the product side, how much time is being spent? How much working capital is being spent in quartile 3 and 4, or SKUs with less than $200 in order per year? Are quartiles 3 and 4 even profitable? And if they're not profitable, which, spoiler alert, they never are, is there at least a strategic reason for keeping them? So to answer that question, is there a strategic reason for keeping small customers, small products? We have what you've all been waiting for. It is a 2x2. You cannot join a webinar from a consulting firm and not see a 2x2. It's like going to a movie theater and not getting popcorn. So here's our version of it, our 80-20 quad. And just to quickly orient you, quad 1 are our top customers buying our top products, right? Our 80s buying our 80s, if you will. So just by virtue of how the math works, we typically see 64% or so of our revenue in quad one. This is the fort, right? This is where all of our value creation is happening today and where most of it probably lies in the future. We have to make absolutely certain customers in quad one are secure, and we have to focus on getting as much wallet share out of them as we possibly can. Quad two is our top customers buying some of our smaller SKUs, our 80s buying our 20s. So it's directionally 16% of revenue just based on how the math works. And we call this the necessary evil, right? It's product that we don't necessarily want to manufacture, it's services we don't necessarily want to offer, but they're going to A customers, they're going to those top customers. So we still do it to maintain those relationships and to build that stickiness, right? So small products, but we still do it because it's strategic. Similarly, quad three, these are small customers, but they're buying our top products. Quad three can be immensely profitable. We just have to figure out how we keep that flow of A product going to B customer without carrying as much overhead and without spending as much time servicing them directly. So this is where we think of like distribution and e-commerce and things like that. And then finally, we have quad four. Some of us lovingly refer to quad four as CRAP, an acronym for can't realize a profit. No matter what you do in quad four, you will not make money. Quad four are your small customers buying your small product. It is a ton of complexity. In the instance of the business we were looking at, if you look in their quad one, 64% of their sales came from 172 customers and 1,800 products. In quad four, they got about 4% of their revenue, but immensely more customers, immensely more products, so much complexity that we have to manage that compresses our margins and distracts us from growing in quad one. So just to make it a little bit more real, if we applied OpEx, right, proportionate to the gross profit generated in each quad. So what we have here is the gross profit from quad 1, 2, 3, 4. We allocate our OpEx based on the percent of revenue from each quad, and it gives us the impression that each of these quads are profitable, right? Some more than others, okay? We still know quad 4 isn't as profitable as quad 1, but at least it's still accretive to the P&L. But the reality is that this company was far more profitable than the 6.8 million here on the P&L. It was actually 40% more profitable because it was making 9.6 million in quad 1. People were essentially spending an equal amount of time in each quad. So when we applied OpEx based on our actual activity and not simply allocating it based on revenue, we found that quad 1 was 9.6 million. The problem was that all of that profit, all of that op income was being eroded by the money that we lost in quads 2, 3, and 4.
Anthony, it's interesting when you look at this data showing quad 2, 3, and 4, not driving profitability. Historically, as I've implemented this, and I've done 10 plus times, quad 1 generally ranges from about 150% to 225% of proportional profit. Quad 2, break even, slightly positive, sometimes can be negative like here, and obviously 3 and 4 generally are destroying value and showing losses. So, this is kind of one set of data, but hopefully that characterizes what I've seen in practice.
Yeah, I think you're right, Bob. I think this is actually fairly conservative where, the company was actually 40% more profitable. I mean, we've seen instances where it's over 200% of the profit is in quad 1 because quad 4 is just such a drain on op income because of all of that complexity. I think you're absolutely right. But we've already established, look, quad 2 and 3, that's strategic. We're going to continue doing that, but there really is no defensible reason to keep quad 4, all right? But I know this is a lot of numbers. If we just take a step back for a minute, if we just look at the big picture, I think this visual tells you all you need to know. What we're doing here is showing you the same quad, but on the left side is proportionate to revenue, and the right side is proportionate to complexity. The point is that most businesses maintain just an incredible amount of complexity for very little in return. And the goal of 80/20, and why so many PE-backed companies are starting to implement this as an operating model, is because it allows us to grow in quad 1, which is profitable growth. Growth in quad 4 is easier, it's faster, but we just demonstrated it's not profitable. Quad 1 is the only place you will get profitable share growth. is it's really common sense. Remember the quote, I'm good at 80-20 because I'm stupid enough to understand it. But it's not easy, because before you can realize the gains in quad 1, you have to get rid of quad 4. You can't focus on quad 1 until quad 4 is gone, because quad 4 is just a cancer to a business. All right, it eats away at our margins. It distracts us from where we need to go. It has to be eradicated. And this is why 80-20 is much more than just a simplification tool. Simplification is the means to the end, and that end is unlocking enormous value creation potential by giving us the freedom to focus on growth in quad 1. So that's it for the theory. Bob, before we get into some real world examples, would you mind just sharing a little bit more of your background with the group today?
Yeah, sure, Anthony. And that was a great overview of 80-20. And hopefully, conceptually, everybody gets the methodology. So just a bit of context for you, kind of set the stage, before we dive into, implementations and results from 80-20. I've been, as we talked about, in various positions implementing 80-20, 20 plus years as a PE-backed CEO. 2 of the 3 realizations I did involved 80-20, and they were at much higher valuations, actually, than peer groups. So we'll talk more about those in a few minutes. I've implemented 80-20 about 12 different instances on 3 different continents around the world. What's interesting, to everybody in the audience, and Anthony as well, is, first off, focus and prioritizing are action verbs in every language. And so 80-20 works everywhere. I've worked, the 12 implementations I've done have been in a variety of different companies, B2B, B2C, industrial distribution, manufacturing, technology, and business service companies. I'm highly passionate about this, and I joined Strategex in 2022 as an operating advisor, so I can continue to teach and mentor and be a CEO liaison, to companies that are implementing 80-20 and leveraging the Strategex services. So, I thought it'd be interesting for all of you to hear how I first learned about 80-20, and this was back in the early 2000s. And, it's kind of stuck in my head, to this point. And so we were presenting a P&L in a communications and statement processing company, DT Systems. And we had a new chairman. We were just presenting our P&L for the very first time. And I heard this noise. And then the chairman and CEO turned around and walked to the wall, put his face up against the wall, and said, "This is what I'm looking at in your P&L," which was essentially, "I can't see anything." He said, I don't really know how this business works, how it runs, how it's managed, unless I can see the customers and the products and the profitability behind that. So we got a quick 80-20 lesson. I remember that to this day. The individual was our chairman at that time, 15-year relationship, mentor of mine across my career with 80-20. And it was really interesting because we then recut the company, re-engineered the data, look at all the different quadrants, and looked at customer and product profitability. And what emerged from that not only was a better way to manage the business using 80-20, but also the fact that we had a fairly low profitability manufacturing company who was producing and sending out communications, and a very high profitable 3x type margin data processing and services company that really didn't recognize. And so we built our whole strategy around that going forward. And the good news is that we actually were able to sell that company, for a very high multiple, about 25% above market, and added probably $40 million in overall shareholder value just from the result of that, process of starting 80-20 and over the next couple of years later. So I've never forgotten that day. So I want to set the stage for you. Is it ever a bad thing for you to focus and prioritize in your company? 80-20 is really driving that into your business model, and it really creates these outcomes. Drives fast incremental growth, be unique and differentiated in your market, build strategic relationships with your top clients, nothing wrong with that, and find more business from them. Better scale your operations, improve your operating margins in the process, improve your management information for decision making, and really help through data, run the business better and more efficiently. Reduce working capital, inventory reductions, receivable reductions, those types of things, and find operating cash flow in the process. Create a business line opportunity, inorganic growth and merger and acquisitions, and we'll talk about that, for a few minutes here today. And then lastly, and most importantly, it's really cultural. Improving employee and team satisfaction is an outcome of this. You find your people love it because they're reducing their B activities and really focusing their efforts on what matters. So, think for a second, as I described all of those kind of value propositions, would you ever say no to investing in a program that achieves all that? Really, that's what 80/20 is all about. And there's two types of implementations, and Anthony, we'll get into this in a little more detail as we talk about implementation. But there's a point in time, 1 to 2 quarters, you'll get the data and get some things done. But how I've implemented this, and the most success I've had with this is making it part of the culture, making it a strategic program, a strategic goal of the company. The data really drives the process and the prioritization. And as a strategic goal, you're never done. Continuous improvement mindset is free flowing with 80/20. And sometimes an acquisition may take you back to the starting line, but you're always focusing and prioritizing within your organization. So Anthony, that kind of sets the stage, and we can focus on implementation and results now.
Yeah, of course. Before I get into some of the questions we've gotten in advance, Peter has a question. So Bob, when we talk about a customer, what's the definition of a customer? So example, if he's selling to Anheuser-Busch, is an individual at the plant the customer, or do we think about Anheuser-Busch as all plants in aggregate?
So Anthony, we would always roll up a customer to a family. They're all part of it, but we also looked at those, individual segments as customers as well. So call it a sub-segment of that family.
Yep.
The strategy is around the family, but you have to pay attention to the divisions where there might be different relationships as well.
Yep. Yeah, working with a welding company right now, and their biggest customer is actually 14 different regions. We do look at them in aggregate when we do the analysis because we really want to understand the full gravity of the account and just how critical it is. But when we're talking about how to optimize, the customer experience, when we're talking about how to best service them commercially, then we start trying, to understand what each of them needs individually as well.
That's right.
And I love your point about working capital too. That's usually, it's amazing how quickly we can move that. On the AR side, for example, one thing we say is you're not truly an 80/20 business unless every aspect of your business is 80/20, and that includes like the way we chase after receivables, right? Instead of oldest to newest, maybe it's largest to smallest. So little things like that can have an amazing impact, and we see really, really big impact on working capital pretty quickly. It's kind of fun.
Absolutely, I think.
So question number one, we talked a lot about how 80/20 is not just a tool for simplifying businesses. I think a lot of people have that perception of it. So I'm really curious just to get some of your stories on how you've used 80/20 for actual growth.
Yeah, so first off, the 80/20 model is all about driving growth, and more profitable growth as an outcome of this. You start with the data, as I've mentioned, I'll continue to reinforce as I talk here. You want to turn that data into actionable management information. So getting that quadrant information, always asking for 2 to 3 years of customer and product sales. And, once you do the quad assessment, the data drives the process. I've seen, situations as you showed on the screen before earlier, 95% of the revenues being driven, by 20% of the customers. That's pretty amazing. And there's huge opportunities when you see that type of opportunity. The same is true with products. So back to that company I mentioned earlier, which was that kind of statement processor, billing, and data services company. We achieved organic growth at 500 basis points above the market, and we sustained that for several years. Well, how do we do that? By implementing 80/20, we address quad 4 right away, as Anthony said. That's critically important. You got to reprice your B products, eliminate or substitute B products right away. And that creates more runway to be successful with quad 1 and simplifies, the organization, removes some of those B activities. And then we focused on quad 1. And this is where the roll up your sleeves, hard work effort comes in. You got to understand your A clients. What share of wallet do we have? What's available? You want to build strong client relationships, critically important. You want to cross-sell your A products that you might not be selling into those relationships if you can, or at least ask the question. Build pricing strategies to incent, full utilization of all your products in your A relationships. Use tiered pricing. Change your sales incentives. The sales teams work on what you pay, right? And so at the end of the day, you want to put those incentives in the right place, focused on driving quad 1. Top grade your customer base, and then find those A substitute for B products, at a great price. So here's a story for you. So in that company I was mentioning before, the first meeting we had with our sales team, 80/20 as a concept, they kind of get it. We said, well, let's sit down and do a detailed assessment of our A clients. There were 30 clients roughly on the list, and we didn't know a lot of information about our clients. So a great first step as you're addressing quad one is just make sure we understand everything about our clients. In some cases, you need to go talk to the clients and get that information. Once you do that, though, we found out we had 100% growth opportunity sitting right inside, our walls with our existing A clients. And on top of that, by re-engineering the sales process and creating sales efficiency, we also found, that we could go after and find a lot more A clients, just like the ones that we had. The easiest sale you always have is to an existing customer. And, for example, we had customers that 50% of their business is what we held, and someone else at 50%. So we implemented tiered pricing and got 90% versus 10. Maybe they did that for disaster recovery reasons, but they could still flip the switch, even at a 90/10 level, to another supplier. In sales, what's always interesting to me is the efficiency when you implement 80/20. We drew a line kind of where that 30th client was in terms of annual revenue. And so we want to find, more clients like this. And that's what we task our sales team with. It's always interesting because CRM has a lot in it. We actually cleaned up, re-engineered our whole CRM, and our sales team became a lot more efficient after that. However, when you change behavior, you're always going to have some resistance. And so with respect to growth, the sales team, they love spending time with their past wins, right? No client's a bad client is something you'll hear, from sales. And, well, don't small clients become big clients? And of course, that's true. So we had some caveats in our program. Occasionally we let a mid-sized client come in that was below that threshold. What was interesting, we told the sales team, if you're going to do that and it doesn't get to that threshold, you lose commission at that 6-month point if it doesn't get there. Yep. And so, there's a nice way to kind of balance this as you implement it, towards, favorability to the team through the transition process. So Anthony, really, 80/20 is all about growth, more profitable growth at the end of the day. It changes how you go to market. It improves your growth trajectory every time I've implemented it and jumpstarts value creation. Yeah. And your quad one work with A always drives your most immediate opportunities.
Yeah. So a couple of questions rolling in, Bob. First, Atul, yes, it is being recorded. You'll get that from ACG once this is over. Jeff, your question about 80/20, creating efficiency in the current customer set, but also using it as we look to expand new customers. I think Bob just addressed that. But another thing to emphasize is when we get rid of quad 4, we can redeploy all of those resources that we were spending there into growing quad 1. 2 ways. First is maximizing wallet share with the customers we currently have. But then to your point, also target selling new customers that look like those customers in quad 1. So the way we like to make it real is we say, if you think about the FBI, right? The FBI is chasing thousands of people across the US right now. And their clearance rate is surprisingly, kind of scarily low. Once you get on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, though, their clearance, their rate is like 95%. So even when we talk about gaining new customers and target selling, we do it through this 80/20 lens. We say, who are the 2 or 3 customers that you wish you had today that you don't? And how can we take all these resources that we now have because we got rid of quad 4 and go after and get it? We've got the story about the world's worst salesperson. He made 1 sale, I think, in 3 years, but that 1 sale just happened to be Facebook. And this was a company that made data cooling products. It was worth it, right? So that's the way we think about growing quad 1. It's not only through maximizing wallet share, but target selling new whales. And then Paul and Ramesh had 2 related products. Bob, maybe you can take this one. It sounds like they understand how this works in a manufacturing context where you have a lot of product complexity, but how have you done this in service businesses or project-based businesses?
Sure. Yeah, and operational excellence is something I'm going to talk about in a little bit, but at a very high level, this model works manufacturing, industrial distribution, in BPO, software, services, technology companies. You focus on DevOps and service delivery. You prioritize your app development, on your A opportunities. Reduces the time spent on QA and reduces your code complexity and gets you to better security, kind of in a technology environment. And so, the model works in both of those. Traditional manufacturing, industrial distribution operations obviously are producing products, but you view the BPO or services And technology business is the same. The products are just slightly different.
Yep. Great. All right. So we know 80/20 is a great framework for thinking about organic growth, but curious how you've also used it for inorganic growth. So how have you used 80/20 as a framework to evaluate add-on acquisitions?
Yeah, I love talking about acquisitions and inorganic growth, Anthony. I use this model to evaluate, value, and integrate acquisitions extensively. Of those 30 acquisitions that Mia mentioned, probably about half of those were leveraged using 80/20. We always used to say M&A was a line of business for us because of 80/20. We actually had expertise and processes that others didn't have to be more successful with it. You hear the academic studies that say that a half to 2/3 of acquisitions actually don't drive shareholder value or destroy shareholder value. So we saw the 80/20 model as a framework to allow a much higher probability of success in acquisitions. As you enter the process, start asking for the right data in the data room right out of the gate. 2 to 3 years of customer and product revenue data. It's traditionally what we asked for. If they were doing customer and product profitably, we wanted to see that. It's always surprising to me how many companies don't have that, and that's a huge driver of 80/20 data and information to run the business. Pretty much right then, once you do the quadrant work, whether there's an 80/20 opportunity, how large it is, how successful this could be. Obviously, the cultural and strategic fits are important. Once those are identified and checked off, then 80/20 kind of drives your implementation operating plan thereafter. There were deals where we could pay 1 to 2 times, sometimes higher multiples, and win because we had 80/20 on our side, and in fact, in some deals we didn't have to give that up, and actually created that value for ourselves. So a quick story for you about a tech services company that I was in, and we actually did a merger of equals. And I know some of you cringe as I do when I hear that term. But we were number 1 and number 2 in the market. It was a very large total addressable market. Both companies had large customers. Both companies had great technology. Both companies had strong products and scale and operations. We put those 2 companies together. That was a bit of a risk, but it ended up highly successful. But what was interesting, it was an auction process. There were tough negotiations, and we actually were able to pay $5 million more than I think in the final negotiations to win the deal. And we could do that because we had gross savings built in from 80/20 that we didn't think others had. We went to the first meeting of the management teams. We were talking about kind of the integration plans, and we kicked it off by talking about 80/20. It's a strategic program. It's our goal. It's how we run the business. A few people on the other side said, yeah, we do that. It's a part of our quality and Pareto process. And we said, no, wait a minute. No, this is strategic. It's how we run the business. And we're going to, run 80/20 on both this company, your company, but also the combined company. So we had a 2x 80/20 project as a result of that one. That all worked at the end of the day. And, we had a much higher multiple when we sold the company on a much larger business. So highly successful. So Anthony, just to wrap this question up on acquisitions, it's a smart model for M&A, creates an entire process around your diligence and integration. Customer and product data drives that. Once you quantify the priorities, that flows into an integration operating plan. And really the key in this, when you're leveraging 80/20 in a strategic program, is to share with your target that you're doing this before the transaction actually closes. Get them kind of bought in and engaged on this. It's how we run the business and how we plan to run it going forward.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a ton of buyers out there, especially financial buyers, that would love to have the latitude of pushing the model a little bit, pushing price up, especially in this, this deal environment is getting pretty competitive. So we talk about earning the right to grow, right? We can't just maximize wallet share because we think we're great. We have to prove to customers first that we're great. One way to do this is through operational excellence. But as I think we've established, we can't be excellent for everyone. We want to be excellent in quad 1. So can you share some examples of how you've achieved this operational excellence idea in quad 1?
Yeah, absolutely. First thing, operations teams, get 80/20 and love it. When I walked into a consumer packaged goods company I ran for several years, just recently, I announced that we were implementing this to operations, and I heard this in the room. They were all clapping. They got it. 80/20 to operations or traditional operations means higher productivity, reduced complexity, removing one-offs, and improving space and availability in your inventory and your warehousing and packaging activities. And just again, making it simple and removing all those different one-offs. It works in a B2B company. It works in a BPO or services company, different than traditional manufacturing, industrial, and distribution companies. And it works in a B2C company. We implemented it at an e-commerce company, and that really took on more of a SKU focus and more of a product focus around 80/20 and driving improvement, focus, and simplification. I will talk about product management and product development and kind of your CapEx approval processes. As you look at this, what comes into those is sometimes very significant in terms of scope and numbers. Your projects are reduced as they come in to these processes. I used to call it the shiny pebble syndrome. Our product development teams were always working on those things that they wanted to, versus market research would say the market is going to accept and adopt. And ultimately 80/20 takes you from build it and they will come to produce it for them, and more will follow. And that's true as capital projects come in as well. You actually have a sponsor and revenue dollars that are driving those. Makes the approval process a lot easier, and a lot less comes through those processes. Yeah. In that global consumer packaged goods company I ran, 80/20 did two things. We were able to reduce the number of SKUs from 20,000, get that, when I came into the company, to 8,000 in 2 quarters. We streamlined all our packaging families and removed a lot of different custom production processes. And the second thing we did is we outsourced our B products. We actually moved them to a third party to produce those, and at the same time continue to service those. In some cases, we actually sold those products to those manufacturers. So scale offset the margin loss from all that. We actually grew our margins a couple hundred basis points, and by outsourcing the B, we were able to reduce one shift, reduce our square footage by 40%, and probably most importantly, as COVID hit, we're actually to spin up a whole new personal safety business segment and grow the company dramatically as a result of the runway we created from 80/20. Just 2 last points on operations. One is your finance team and the ERP system. You really have to have a solid team and a solid system to really understand your costs, and make sure you look at that customer product profitability trend as you track along, and also make sure you're tracking through a KPI or tracker methodology the benefits that 80/20 delivers. Then the other point in operations, and this is a key one, culture, your human resources team. Engage them in this process around 80/20. Incentive compensation should be tied to it. Annual goals and objectives at companies I ran were tied to 80/20 initiatives, even bonuses were. And communication at town halls, you can't underestimate the importance of communication of this. Why we're doing it? First of all, get everybody bought into it, but then subsequently, how are we performing? How are we doing? And actually, I had team members come up from all the different departments and present at town halls talking about their initiatives and what they're accomplishing. And so that was pretty powerful. So Anthony, in conclusion, 80/20 is a very strong alignment with operational goals and objectives.
So if you got applause from the ops team when you introduced this, what kind of reaction did you get from the sales team?
The applause didn't come until about the 3rd or 4th meeting, but we got there.
How did you
it's a really key point. First off, your CEO and your executive management team have to be bought into this for it to be successful, and then you cascade that down the organization. And so if you're sales VP and the CEO's obviously driving it, which is what I used to do, and we got the executive management team on board, the head of sales or business development was on board at that point, and so could kind of shepherd that process behind the scenes with the team. So you can get there.
Yeah. And Alex, I think we started to touch a little bit on your question about consumer and e-commerce businesses. There are some nuances to how we apply, so happy to have a follow-up conversation with you on that. So in addition to using 80/20 to achieve operational excellence, there's also customer experience excellence, right? That's another way we have to earn the right to grow. So for example, we know that companies with a best-in-class net promoter score tend to outpace the category growth rate anywhere from 2 to 3x. So in addition to using this as a tool for op excellence, how did you use it for customer experience excellence as well?
No, it's a great question. And I kind of held off talking about customer service because I knew you were going to ask me about customer experience and customer service excellence. You made this point earlier. You need to get across to your entire team that not all customers are equal. We need to focus your services and support in that manner, to drive value to those customers that matter the most. So here's a few points with respect to customer experience in 80/20. First of all, the goal is to create raving fans in your A clients. I've always said the best marketing is viral marketing, and get your clients out there talking about you, and build and leverage that. Streamline your service, leverage technology to deliver self-service, the portals that are available, particularly for any B business that's retained. I always used to laugh. We did kind of time studies and looked at our customer service team, and what ended up happening in the data is that some of the B customers were taking the most time out of our system. In some cases, our customer service team had great friends who were B customers, and they just love to talk to each other. So, those are the types of B activities you need to address. And then for A customers and driving those raving fans, we created an account management program. And as you create some of those self-service tools, your customer service team may not need those resources. So we redeployed them to be account managers. And also, it's important to remove your top salespeople from being account managers as well, because they like doing that too, in addition to selling. So you want them just out there selling to those A clients. But we set up with our account manager program, top to top meetings, which is strategic meetings, executive teams of our company and executive teams of the customer. And we told them what we were doing. We explained to them our quarterly review process, some cases semi-annual, depending upon customer viewpoint. And then we actually met with them, face to face when we could. COVID, obviously, more video conference, but we sat down and talked to them. And we had a scorecard, Anthony, that we used. And I will comment on the scorecard that's up here. It's 4 quadrants, just like 80/20. Graphs, we drove the scorecard with graphs. So this was pretty much the last page of the package. But I wanted to show this to you because it talks through kind of the aspects of 80/20 and how it impacts that customer and how it's advantageous to them as well by virtue of our implementing this. So first off, sales trends, looking across 2 years, product sales trends as well as overall sales trends, quality and service levels, on-time delivery, error rate, quality incidents, be very transparent about those. And 80/20 can obviously drive a lot of quality as you reduce your complexity in your organization. If they're a net promoter, we thank them when we did those NPS, score surveys, but how can we get you to a 10 for the conversations? And then we always said that the kind of top right quadrant, what's new, what's coming, kind of the 80/20 initiatives that are impacting and benefiting them. And then the last quadrant was a strategic conversation. We left it blank. Where's your business going? What do you see happening in the markets? What products are you looking for? How can we help you deliver those? And then how do we, achieve strategic alignment? So you left the meeting feeling like we knew a lot more about that customer. They knew a lot more about us, and we could kind of, combine to an effective strategy going forward. An anecdote I'll share: one of the acquisitions we did of a tech services company, we started at a 30 NPS. We implemented 80/20 on those A clients, and we got that to a mid-70s in 18 months, and we pulled A customers only. So that's pretty dramatic in terms of the benefit that 80/20 has resulted in raving fans. I always get this question, which is, won't implementing 80/20 hurt our reputation?
Yep.
And very specifically, my answer to that is no, if done carefully with the right incentives and the right communication, both to customers and to your internal team. It does help your reputation tremendously with your A clients. Removing that B is a repricing exercise. It's not a goodbye exercise usually, unless you happen to sell that. It has a whole different communication around it, which is positive. But this is a strategic move that you're making, and it drives much better relationships. The one thing you have to make sure of, though, is take the cost out and the overhead out that's supporting the business that you're actually reducing.
Yeah. So about 5 minutes left, maybe 1 or 2 more questions. And I think something that's especially relevant for this crowd is, when you were doing 80/20, was it something that you just focused on at the start of the hold period, at the midpoint, or was 80/20 also something that you used as you were thinking about starting to prepare for an exit?
Yeah. So, realization, I've been through several of those events, Anthony. So, 80/20 can be implemented in acquisitions, so pre-investment and all across the investment cycle. There's no wrong time to implement this. My message is just get started. And there's 2 approaches here in a realization. One is you've been successful with 80/20, you've implemented or successfully gotten it started. Make sure you include 80/20 as a chapter in your confidential information memorandum, your SIM, as you go about to sell the business. The second piece, though, is, maybe you're looking to sell your company and it's a difficult operating environment today, right? And inflation, supply chain issues, labor cost, or even labor certainty. or issues that impact the business. And perhaps you can't exit or sell at this point in time because you're not growing or unable to grow, or your markets, aren't growing. Kick off an 80/20 program right now, and set that up as kind of staging towards a sale process that you could get started in a quarter or two. Investment banks love this because it's a story. They want to tell a story, and if you have something like 80/20, in your hip pocket as you're telling that story, that's fantastic. Talking about your total addressable market, you may have a small share in a very large growing market that may just be stabilized right now, and 80/20 is a great way to create incremental growth. And so, Anthony, yeah, I mean, it works in realizations when you've implemented fully as a strategic program, or when you're just getting started implementing it and getting some pro forma credit in that process, to the extent you can in today's market.
Right.
And you saw the ITW market cap results early in this presentation. I firmly believe by implementing 80/20, you can get a 25 to 30% premium, in the market in terms of the better growth rates that you have and the better margins that you're yielding, towards getting that price in the market.
Yeah, so I know we got a couple more questions from the audience, so we'll address those in just a minute. But Bob, last question. I know the focus today has been a lot on how powerful and transformative 80/20 is for businesses. But I think, at least for myself, the reason I'm so passionate about this is because it's equally as transformative in our personal lives. So just curious, in your experience, have you seen more results using 80/20 in a personal context or in a professional context?
Well, actually both, Anthony. I laugh. It holds true in life. I've got 4 adult kids, and I like to say there's always one that needs me more than another. So actually that's kind of the 75/25 principle. I suppose if I had one more, I probably could have gotten to the 80/20 principle, as long as only one needed me at a point in time. The suits and ties analogy, I can't use that anymore. It used to, it's obsolete now, but used to wear 20% of what I had. And I think that's true in my wife's shoe collection today. But seriously, have focus and prioritization, what makes you happy, your friends, your passions outside of work, and what you spend your time on and who you spend it with. Apply the 80/20 principle there, and I think you'll be happier. And in professional life, it's made a huge difference for me. Again, over the last 20 years that I've been implementing it, it's all about focus and prioritization. It drives what you do, but most importantly, it drives what you don't do and say no to. Most execs and managers are oversubscribed. So cut things out of your schedule. Ask your team, what's not adding value, and cut those out just as part of this process. 80/20 was always an agenda item on my senior management meeting agendas, as well as at our strategic management meetings we had periodically as we drove our strategic plan. It was, at least a 2-hour complement of that meeting as we continue to drive it as a strategic goal. I've always said 3 Ps drive everything. It's people, and customers fit into people. It's products and outstanding products. And interestingly, customers and products, kind of tie 80/20 together, and it's process. And 80/20, it's kind of that umbrella over which you can be successful with those relationships and with those outstanding products and services that add value, to your customers. So, 2 things to remember, just to kind of wrap up here. Number one, 80/20 is a strategic program. It works as a point in time, but doesn't drive the value, and it's not as entirely effective. And so the second is it's very growth oriented, and focus and prioritization is key to the overall process. And that really jumpstarts your value creation as you focus getting quad 4 out and moving quad 1 up. Yeah. So just, my conclusion here, it's a fantastic model. It's a strategic program. It's been highly responsible for my career success, over the last several years. And just get started on your journey today. Strategex has fantastic resources and are here to help you, get started with this or implement it. And, Anthony, really, thank the audience for their time today. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining. We had some great questions. And Bob, I would just echo that. I think I had a really hard time saying no before 80/20. And I learned that no is one of the most powerful words you have, because when you say no to one thing, you're saying yes to something else. And when you say no to something that doesn't matter, you're actually getting time, right? And that's the one thing we can't buy is time, and 80/20 lets us do that. So bottom line, make more, work less, more fun along the way. Have some questions from the group. Here's our contact info. We'd love to carry on the conversation. Reach out anytime, 24/7, talk about this. Highly encourage you to run your quartiles, take a look at it. We can go over it together. Anything we can do to make this a little bit more real for you. I think we have maybe 1 or 2 questions. Gianfranco sent over a question, which I think is a good point. He said the underlying assumption here is that we're assuming our operating expenses are 100% variable. So the example he uses is the accounts payable person may have less to do, but there's still a job, right? There's still that cost. So I think it's a great point, but let's say we're in a company with 5 accounts receivable people, and we get rid of 40% of our transactions in quad 4, which means we're getting rid of 40% of our receivables. You can start taking some of those expenses out of the business. Now, that's the optimization part of 80/20. We're not so quick to rush and say, do that. We're saying, can we take those resources and redeploy them in quad 1? So we simplify not just for the sake of cutting costs, we simplify to free up resources to say yes to quad 1. No to quad 4, yes to quad 1. If we can take some costs out along the way without compromising our ability to grow in quad 1, that's an added benefit. But again, the simplification part of 80/20 is a means to the end. So hopefully that answers that question. Bob, how about maybe one more question? This one comes from a tool. Curious if the analysis can be done from a profit contribution perspective rather than just revenue. So any guidance on how we apply this? I think the point he's getting at is how can we apply this in a business where there's recurring revenue? Sure.
Yeah, we always look in those kind of recurring, revenue, maybe even BPO type companies. We always looked at it both ways. The first cut's kind of revenue and the second cut is contribution margin. I mean, the P&Ls we were creating had direct contribution margin. Then we were, taking indirect costs, and we really had to do a tight job of determining what our costs are, to activities. And so your finance team's got to leverage that. We were then looking at, contribution to profit and overhead, and then making a decision based on, the foundation of the business, what growth, strategies we had, how much overhead to retain in the business, kind of to your prior point there, Anthony. But yeah, we looked at it both ways to that question, in a type of business that's more of an annuity stream. Absolutely.
Great. Well, we got 2 minutes to go. I think we'll give you those minutes back, give you time to prep for your next call. Again, really appreciate you taking time today. There were a couple of questions about, I missed part of it. Will there be a recording? The answer to that is yes. You'll get that from ACG, and we'll follow up with you as well. But again, don't wait for follow up. Reach out anytime. Happy to carry on the conversation.
See you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.